Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. Welcome to the seminar 5, which is on the framework for economic growth, Pakistan, which is the national growth strategy approved by the NEC in 2011. This is the second seminar on the subject, which NMC is holding. The last one, the first one actually, was held for the last course, and it was rated to be very, very informative by your predecessor course. We are very grateful to all our speakers who helped us organize the seminar. The seminar sequence would be keynote address by Dr. Nadeemullah, Deputy Chairman Planning Commission of Pakistan, who's with us on video link from Islamabad. Then Mr. Shahid Sattar, Member Energy, Planning Commission of Pakistan, who's here with us, would address. And after that, there are going to be 4 panel discussions on the main themes given in this growth strategy. Those are competitive and vibrant markets, creative cities and connectivity, youth and community engagement, and governance. Following this, we would have concluding remarks given by Dr. Nadeemullah, Deputy Chairman, before the rector closes the seminar. The format for panel discussions would be briefly that each panel discussion would be of 90 minutes, with each of the panelists speaking or making a presentation for 20 minutes. The order would be such that first one of the guest panelists would speak, then one of our course participants would make his presentation, and this would be followed by a 30-minute question and answer session. And finally, the panel chair would come and wind it up give his concluding remarks. So we start our proceedings with the keynote address by Dr. Nadeemullah. But before I request Dr. Saab, I would very briefly share his career profile with you. He is an Etihsonian, did his BSc Economics from the London School of Economics, MA Economics from the University of Chicago, his PhD in Economics also from the University of Chicago, where his thesis was supervised by Gary Becker, a Nobel laureate. He started his career with the Pakistan Institute of Development Economics before going on to the IMF, where he has served as Division Chief Asia region in the IMF institution. He has over 24 years experience with the IMF, including leading technical assistance missions and policy and research teams, and as a resident representative in 2 developing countries. He has published 5 books and over 50 papers in major journals in edited volumes. May I now request the Deputy Chairman Planning Commission to kindly give his keynote address.
Thank
Sir,
you.
can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me? Am I audible? Am I clear? Can everybody hear me?
Sir, couldn't have been better.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Couldn't have been better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saghira Sahab. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Let me begin with an apology. I'm sorry I'm physically not there, but you know how things happen here with the ever-changing landscape in Islamabad. Things I couldn't leave, so I apologize. Many of you know that I like nothing better than an academic environment. It's always fun to be in a learning environment. There are not enough opportunities like this in Pakistan, unfortunately. So we all keep chasing our tail. Let me just say what I'm going to talk about is basically growth in Pakistan. To my mind, this is a forgotten subject. I'm pretty certain you have had no conversations on economic growth in Pakistan. Wherever I go, I find the economic growth to be a totally forgotten subject. If I look at it on television, there are discussions on the budget, but no discussions on economic growth. If I look at academia, opinion columnists, they discuss the budget, but never growth. We are a budget-obsessed economy. We never seem to think of the main force, which is economic growth. Ultimately, it's economic growth that countries are after. They don't care about little things like accounting identities, which most of us are concerned about. So in most places, in the last time when I was there, I mentioned this very clearly and I will mention it again. I'm now firmly convinced this country does not want growth. And we can argue that, and we will argue that. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background to the framework of economic growth. I'm going to assume that you've read the framework of economic growth, so I don't want to go deeply into it. I want to give you a little bit of the background. What is the thinking behind the economic growth framework? So this is like the background paper to economic, to the framework for economic growth. I gave this as a lecture at the PID. It's going to be published there in the Pakistan Development Review, called Why Pakistan Does Not Grow. I want to begin with 2 points. One is that as a people, we do not want to change. And growth lies in change. And that is why we don't want growth. The second point I want to make is that the epistemology, the way we think in this country, the way we derive knowledge in this country is flawed. And that is why we don't have growth. Wherever I go, and I'm sure you've heard this too, and I'm sure many of you will say it during the seminar, people love to say this. It's all about implementation, implementation, implementation. Forget about policy, forget about thinking, just implement, implement, implement. Get a picture of it. I often ask, implement what? And then I hear a long list of things that the speaker probably heard over dinner last night, or heard from the latest sort of conversation with the representative of the donor. Unfortunately, those are just stray ideas with no idea of how to implement them. I always think of it like this: get a 12-year-old kid or even a 10-year-old kid, give him a book on tennis, and say, now become Djokovic. I don't think it's likely to happen. So please try and understand the most important thing is the reason we don't grow is because we're not willing to work hard enough to understand how growth takes place, to understand how to even get into asking the specific questions that will allow us to have economic growth. And those questions are uncomfortable questions. They're not easy questions. They're not questions that you can just take out of a canned book or that you can learn from a donor. Please also note that I am going to say nothing about the nuclear issue. Although this was what came out in the papers last year when I was trying to go to do the same thing at the National Defence University, and we still haven't done that because they still are not interested in growth. We're interested in other things. Okay, let's begin. Let's go to the first slide. Let's take a look at the picture. Can you see the slides? I hope you can. The first picture.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The first picture is about economic growth experience across South Asia. Let's just look at it a little bit. If you look at this, you'll see Pakistan's growth. The long run growth, which is the straight line in the middle, which is, you could regard it as an average, you could regard it as a regression line, whatever. It's just a way of averaging growth over the long run. Long run growth in Pakistan is coming down. In other countries, all the other 4 countries, it is going up. You can also see that Pakistan is probably the most volatile of the 4 countries. Sri Lanka shows a bit of volatility, but since the war is over, it's now straightening out. Bangladesh is straightening out a lot. India is beginning to straighten out. So Pakistan's growth rate, long run growth rate is coming down, as well as Pakistan's growth rate is most volatile. Next slide, please. If you look at the next slide, you'll see GDP growth rate in Pakistan. Again, this is long run growth. You can see is the lowest lower. And most important to note is China. China is growing at 9% plus. China for the last 30 years has grown at 9 to 10% average. Double digit for about 20 years. So ladies and gentlemen, high growth is possible. Malaysia, Indonesia, you look at that. Most countries that make their way securely into middle income group grow at 7% per annum for 20 years plus. What is required to get in strongly into the middle income group is a high growth rate like 7 to 8%. Anything less than that, you can't grow. You can't grow it too. Let's look at the next slide now. Look at our investment savings ratios. If you look at China, China is now investment savings ratios close to 40. In Malaysia, similar. India is also growing at a rate. Investment savings ratios are very high. Pakistan, 12 to 15%. People are not investing, not saving. Why? It's not that people are stupid. The answer must be something else. Next slide. So let's summarize. These are the hard facts that we're going to deal with if you want to deal with growth. And I want to keep it very simple. Hard facts are very simple. Pakistan's growth rate is volatile. If you look at this chart, every 2-3 years we grow to 6-7%, then we crash to 2-3%. It's a very volatile growth path. When you grow to 6-7%, people feel very happy. There's kind of euphoria in the country. When we come down to 2-3%, we feel very unhappy. Oh my God, things have fallen apart. We can't sustain long-run growth. We can't sustain long-run growth. However, we need to. That is why I'm surprised why nobody discusses growth. I've said this often in the staff college. There should perhaps be about 10 days of nothing but growth. You should perhaps think of nothing but growth for the next few decades. Most countries that want to grow do nothing else but think of growth, and they treat the framework of economic growth as Bible, like Malaysia, for example. And it's very interesting too, Pakistanis contributed to the making of the growth framework in Malaysia. Now, why do we need to grow at a higher rate? Ladies and gentlemen, it's simple demographics. our population is youthful. We've got 90 million kids, half the population under the age of 20. We've got 90 million kids under the age of 20. Those kids have to find jobs. I addressed a group of the youth parliament 3 days ago, a group of about 100 kids, fresh out of college. I asked them to raise their hands how many have jobs. It shocked me, even though these statistics are known to me, it shocked me that only about 5 or 6 people raised their hands. The rest are still looking for a job. Ladies and gentlemen, the labor force in this country grows by 3.6% per annum. You can see this in the growth framework. Unless we grow at 7-8% consistently for the next 20 years, these kids are not going to find jobs. And this is, we're not dealing with the backlog of unemployment. We're just dealing with additional labor force that's coming in. If we don't deal with this problem, the unemployment lines are going to increase. And I don't have to preach to you where those kids are going. Obviously, they will be unhappy and they will seek some kind of justice, which may not be to yours and my liking. So that is the reason why we must all think growth for the next few years and think about this. Here I might also add lots of people will now turn around and say this, think about, oh my God, what about poverty, what about this, what about that? Of course all those issues are there. But in this country we've got obsessed with worrying about the side issues and not thinking about the main course. The main course is economic growth. If you have economic growth, you can do many other things. If you don't have economic growth, you're just sitting there trying to talk about things without having the ability or resources to do anything. So let's think about our growth framework. Let's go to the next slide. It's very simple. Right now, as I said, growth and development is a lost narrative. As you might have seen in your own syllabus, there's very little conversation on growth and development. Yes, you probably looked at the budget in and out. Yes, you probably looked at the tax GDP ratio in and out. Yes, you probably looked at the poverty numbers. And yes, you probably looked at the last donor report. Growth and development is a lot more than just those things. In Pakistan, as I said, it's a lost narrative. We are not even interested in it. That doesn't mean that we don't have a growth approach. We have a growth approach. This is what our ancestors handed us here in the Planning Commission 40, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. In those days, it was central planning, it was project-based growth, it was donor-led growth, it was a push towards industrialization. We are still following that approach. We still have a hardware-based approach, which means basically we're trying to do projects, build flyovers, build roads, build dams, whatever. And we are continuously seeking foreign aid to do that kind of thing. Trying to encourage our industry through subsidies, through making industrial estates, etc. But if you go back to the slide that I just showed you, our growth rate remains volatile. Our long-run growth keeps coming down. Should we begin to think differently? When I say this, people say, no, implement. Implement what? Build more flyovers? Okay. I'm afraid that won't do it. It just won't do it. But the other thing is also very important. The last 2 points I've got on the slide. Why are we suspicious of growth? Why don't we want growth? And we should address that too. Why do we have a policy and intellectual failure when it comes to thinking about economics in this country? Okay, next slide. In the growth framework, we've talked about it. How have we done it? It's not something that we've thought up or dreamt up or, it has come to us through some divine guidance. No. We have looked at global research. We have consulted globally. We have consulted locally. As Shahid Sattar is there, Member Energy is one of our best guys. He will tell you we have held many conversations around the country. Universities, think tanks, chambers. We've gone everywhere. We've tried to learn from them. We've tried to argue with them. We've tried to converse with them. We've picked some of the best brains around the world, from Harvard to whatever. We've obviously done our own research to try and find out what is it that drives growth. Now, when I mention research and when I mention learning and reading, people get very suspicious, so please bear with me. I don't know how else to learn. I don't know Some people think you can learn in drawing room. I don't think so. I think we have to go and learn from the world, and we did. The rest of the world now is talking about moving away from hardware to software. If you look at it, many of you might have seen this. There's a new book out by Nathan Phil. It's been reviewed in many of our newspapers too. They talk about institutional failure as the reason why growth doesn't take place. If you go and read the number of the book all the way from 1998 Landers to now, number of books which will tell you, number of people that will tell you very easily elusive quest for growth. We have to worry about the software, not the hardware. What is the software and the hardware? Hardware is where we are trying to continuously, everybody, when I sit down and talk to all the people, everybody says, let's build this, let's build this. For example, we built 137 universities. But I keep asking the HEC, where are the professors? Unfortunately, there are very few professors, but we've got 137 beautiful campuses on 1,000 acres, 2,000 acres, right? As if land is what makes university. Buildings that look like Taj Mahal, but no professors. We built the whole of Constitution Avenue. I was telling the finance minister the other day. Let's walk down Constitution Avenue. The whole of Constitution Avenue has beautiful buildings. What is the productivity of those buildings? Why use the word productivity? Does anybody know what productivity means? Productivity is how intensively we use our resources. For example, how intensively can you crop? How intensively can you use a lecture hall? How intensively you can use a stadium? How intensively you can use your trade size? You can always increase the use of something or the value of something by using it better. That is something that we don't do well. You go down Constitution Avenue, I was saying, there are about 8 or 10 auditoriums in Constitution Avenue. There's a convention center at the end of Constitution Avenue. The use of that, I've checked, is almost negligible. The convention center is hardly used. Those auditoriums are hardly filled. There's a China building that is hardly used. Islamabad, we checked at 20 at the frequency of courses once in a while. Even the staff college, you can do the analysis yourself. What is the intensity of use of this land that you're sitting on? What is the intensity? And that's what we're talking about. It's about productivity. So that's a software versus hardware. By software, people will tell you governance. That's an overused word, I don't like it. I'm talking about productivity. I'm talking about management. Management to increase productivity. Whether you're managing railways, whether you're managing energy, whether you're managing, I know, everybody would love to talk about energy, and people tell me, give us energy and we'll solve the world problem. And I'm sure you'll have a few industrialists there and they'll tell you, you give us energy, we'll conquer the world. But as Shah Sardar, who's probably the best man in the country on energy, will tell you, 3 things. We did have energy 10 years ago. What mountains did these guys conquer with energy when we had it? Export to GDP ratio has not gone up in the last 10 years. Export to GDP ratio sits where it is. So energy cannot be the constraint. Secondly, energy, as Shah Sardar will tell you much better than I can, energy is a governance problem. We have created an institutional infrastructure that slows down investment. We have created an institutional infrastructure that prices energy wrong. We have created an institutional infrastructure that makes us use energy badly. If you notice, the word that I keep using again and again is institutional. The phrase that I keep using again and again is institutional infrastructure. It's the same thing that, as the Motto says in My Nation's Fair, where Easterly said, it's the same thing that many thinkers are pointing to. It's all about institutions. Not about implementation. So, first thing that we have to do is change our focus on software. Next slide, please. To illustrate what I mean by this, as I said, there's a lot of literature on this. I just thought these 6 killer apps would be an interesting way to think about it. Although you can take many other thinkers who've done this too. So let's take Neil Ferguson's 6 killer apps, his book on civilization, which just come out a year ago, or 2 years ago. And you can go see his TED talk on YouTube and you'll see he makes a very convincing case. And this is not new. Landis said roughly the same thing about 12 years ago. And some other people said that. In fact, many people turn around and say, they trace it back to Adam Smith too and say, hey, Adam Smith also had it. Unfortunately, you have to read to appreciate it. Okay. What are the the 6 killer apps. They're all software. He doesn't mention highways. He doesn't mention, flyovers and all the things that we are interested in, the hardware. No energy there. Competition, the scientific revolution, property rights, modern medicine, consumer society, the work ethic. Jesus, did we ever think about these? Do we have competition in this country? Go to the Competition Commission website. Oh, please, I hope the Competition Commission comes and spoken to you. They will tell you the state of competition is abysmal in this country. We have done some analysis, for which again I got lambasted on the paper. There are 6,700 lines, or 6,000 something lines in the tariff schedule, out of which we use 4,700 lines, out of which 4,000 have SROs on them. What are SROs? They are giving individual monopolies to various producers. They are giving individual advantages to various producers. That's the best way to kill competition. Even today, there are regulations all over the place that prohibit entry. For example, entry into the automobile sector is prohibited, or severely retarded. Entry into many sectors. Banking sector is not allowed. Entry is a big way for competition to happen. Competition happens when you have entry and death both. Even today, we don't have a framework for killing companies. The average life of a company in the West is 40 years. The average life of a company in Pakistan is infinite. They don't die. The average life of an infant industry in the world is 5 years. The average life of an infantry in Pakistan is 60 years and counting. We keep protecting them. Property rights. Where do we have property rights? Scientific revolution. We don't believe in reading and learning and research. So where's the scientific revolution? Consumer society. We don't want people to consume. We have already distorted the tariff structure and competitive structure to such an extent that the consumption is severely retarded. We'll talk about that. And most importantly, the work ethic. Where is the work ethic? Yesterday or day before yesterday, this article, Shahid has it, he can give it to you if you like, came out in the Foreign Policy, which contained the review of the Why Nations Fail. And it's very interesting. It says 10 reasons why countries don't make it. Number one, they talk about North Korea. It's called lack of property rights. First, and the divide between North Korea and South Korea, many people have written about. In fact, you can find slides on YouTube which will show you how North Korea is dark at night and South Korea is lit up. Again, brother, same gene, same family, everything. Why the difference? It comes down to one thing: institutions. And the key institution is property rights. Second, they talk about Uzbekistan, forced labor. Third, they talk about South Africa, tilted playing field. That means industry and mining companies have taken advantage. Fourth, they talk about Russia. Elites block new technologies. Sounds familiar? We still have technology in Pakistan that's 1980s. We don't allow new technology. Somalia, no law and order. Colombia, weak central government. And 8, Peru, bad public policies. 9, Bolivia, political exploitation. Sierra Leone, 10, fighting over spoils. Bad. The elite groups are competing over spoils. So what do we learn? That if we want growth, we have to review the software of the country, which is the management, which is the regulatory structure, which is the tariff structure, create more competition, and worry about these killer apps. Next. So let's look at the nature of the state, role of state. The key institution that people talk about is the nature and role of state. Next slide, please. Now let's look at this, very, very interesting. There are a number of ideas here that have been put forward by many thinkers. North's a very famous thinker, and you heard Akmal Hussain, he talks about it a lot, and North's famous limited access state. Asimoglu, etc. have come up with a new extractive state theory. Mancourt also came up with predatory state in about the 1980s with this decline of nations. All of these talk about, it's roughly the same definition, that the elite, which was created by this kind of state, or the state which is created, it's an elite capture of the state. They want to limit competition, they want to keep the resources for themselves, they do not want to allow change to happen, and that is why you do not have economic growth. Because somehow you get locked into an equilibrium. Some manufacturer says, please don't allow imports of this thing because I cannot survive without this, so you have to perpetuate that manufacture. Somebody says, please let me keep this land forever because this land cannot be now rezoned because I don't want change. I'm very comfortable sitting in my position because I have a first mover advantage. Okay, you don't have that. So once you start preserving privilege, you cannot have change. And this is what happens. It's the elite capture of the state. Now it's very interesting. It's not just Pakistan that has had it. It's very interesting that from 2008 we are watching the same thing happen in the US and Europe. Europe right now is contending with the same thing. The financial market, which is the new elite, which is kind of struggling with the state for, not just survival but aggrandizement. The state is struggling on how to regulate them. But it's the same thing that we are facing. So it's a tough question. It's not something that you can say, oh, it's going to happen overnight, but it is. But just look at it. If you go to the next slide, you'll see. What do we have? Look at the cost of doing business in Pakistan. You'll see very clearly that all the way up, if you see the biggest factors are corruption, government instability, political instability, inflation, inefficient government bureaucracy, crime and theft, etc. All these are management issues. All these are the way we organize ourselves. It's all the software issues. And those software issues are the ones that never receive any attention in our dialogue. We do not worry about these software issues. If we do, we say, oh, bad governance, and then we are happy about it. Like you see many of the people on television saying, let's improve our governance. That doesn't mean anything. It's an empty slogan. We have to go a little further than that. We have to talk about the role of the state, which is the next slide. If you look at the role of the state, this is the key point that we have to think about. Two things we have to think about. Is there a capture of the state? Is there a capture of regulation? For example, take any sector of the economy. Who's the regulator? Is the regulator captured or not? This is the key question that we are asking in every country, not just Pakistan. The regulator must be above the market, but it must not just not be captured. The regulator must also be competent. Our regulators have both problems, competence and capture. But I think there's a bigger problem. How big is the government? Is the government small? We began to do this analysis. We went from market to market trying to look at the role of the government. For example, if the government right now is very big in the construction sector, what is the state of competition? The government is the leader in the construction sector because there is very large construction companies. Then the sector is dominated by the government. If in the agricultural sector, the government is the main player in the wheat market, it is dominating the wheat market. If in the fertilizer sector, the government is the main subsidy giver to the wheat market, is dominating the market. When we start to do this kind of analysis, we find that the government, size of the government, or the footprint of the government, or the government's ability to control the market, allows it to control about 50% of GDP, which is a huge role for the government. Then we look at the regulatory structure. We try and find out, hey, where is the anti-barrier restricted, who has captured the government, etc. We find that could be another 60-70% of GDP. God, that takes up 67% of GDP. Then we look at it, urban real estate. The government controls a large fraction of the urban real estate. Where can the construction industry go? Where do you have large construction? We don't see tower cranes in the country. We don't see big construction in the country. We don't see private sector availability of any kind. So we add that in. Hey, we're already up to 70-80% GDP. Where the hell are people going to invest? Where's the space to invest? So it's not surprising that you don't have investment rates picking up because the space to invest is taken up by the government. That's why I keep saying to Ismail Qureshi and many of your people, the role of government must receive serious attention because we are very confused about it. People still say the government should do more. Should the government do more or less? I'm not trying to give you a market versus government solution. Please don't. That's a lazy solution. That solution has been over and done with. It's not market versus government, ladies and gentlemen. It's markets and government. It's like two parents produce a kid and raise a kid. The kid is the economy. Markets and government must work well together. There must be quality markets and quality government. There must be quality parents if you're going to have a good kid. And that's the important thing. Right now, the government is a market participant in every sector. It is subsidizing every sector. It is playing an unfair role in every sector through its subsidy and regulatory policies. Its service delivery is very poor. It has weak institutions everywhere. And it supports monopolies. Now, that's a heavy charge. Maybe I'm wrong. Prove me wrong. But I think that that's very important. Our analysis suggests this. And our analysis suggests that the first thing to do is, and that is why in our growth strategy, first pillar is quality governance. Now we can discuss it. There's lots of stuff to be done on that. I'm not saying we have all the last word. This is very important. Look at the next slide. Here's the footprint of the government. You can see in every sector the government is large. Counting, we've got about 44%. Add to it the regulatory burden. Add to it the fact that the government controls all the real estate. Add to it the fact that the government is messing up the international trade market and favoriting various producers. The government is the main player in the market, which is why people are just lobbying the government. My favorite example of this, which I use frequently, is this thing. Apple, iPhone. Steve Jobs, a poor kid, who rose out of nowhere, an orphan, never went to the government, never even went to the financial sector, has raised the largest company in the world, which has 100 billion in cash, 10 times more than Pakistan has. Steve Jobs did it how? Through ingenuity, through competition, not through looking for regulation, subsidy, cheap loans, etc., cheap energy. He just went and did his thing. And that's important. And that's what we call entrepreneurship. Next slide, please. So, you see the government controls. You see the role of the government. Large public sector corporations everywhere. They're sitting around, trading with each other, and then holding back money. And that creates circular debt. What is the circular debt? Shahzad will give you a better lesson on that than me. For God's sakes, it's crazy. It's all the government agencies. There's a small amount of private sector. But the public sector enterprises are sitting in the heart of the market. They're competing with the market, they're dominating the market, they are creating a set of incentives where now the industrialists are looking for guarantees from the government rather than going out like Steve Jobs and doing entrepreneurship. Regulations, cumbersome regulations. Takes you months on end to do things. Openness has been destroyed. Presumptive taxes. What the hell is presumptive taxes? Withholding taxes, all kinds of crazy things which don't work in the world. Most important, ladies and gentlemen, construction industry leads everywhere in the world. Construction industry is the largest player in the world, but I'm afraid construction industry has been destroyed by the fact that bureaucrats want houses in the middle of town. We want nice pleasure garden in the middle of town. I'm sorry, Boardwalk. In Islamabad, we did an analysis of monetization of housing, and although it would be done, but I'll give you the analysis very simply. In Islamabad, if we monetize the houses of the civil servants, we release 880 acres of land, on which CDA tells me, I haven't done the CDA tells me, Housing Ministry tells me, that if we work on international lines, mixed use, high-rise, etc., we could probably have 10 trillion worth of investment, which is 50% of GDP. That's just in Islamabad. If we did it outside Islamabad, everywhere, we could double, triple our GDP. Now, the fact that we're not doing it, we don't want to do it. We're enjoying it. So what's wrong with that? That's a lifestyle choice that we made. I can't complain. I can only say, fair enough. I mean, if that's what we want, that's fine. But the investment opportunity has been foregone. That is a tax on the people of Pakistan, and we must remember that. Next slide, please. So, what do we have? Now, if you again think about it, most societies have a way of progressing. Everybody, life is all about progressing, making yourself better or whatever. How do you do it? You can do it through 2 or 3 ways. You can do it through hard work, entrepreneurship, Steve Jobs' way. Or you can do it other ways too. For example, the Al Capone way, which is the mafia way. Okay, go ahead and kill people or whatever. You can also do it another way, which is happening in the financial markets or whatever. That you basically make fools of people through whatever, and that's also happening. You can also do it through the government by getting some kind of a regulatory ruling in your favor, by getting some kind of a guarantee from the government, etc. That's called rent seeking. And this is what's happening here. Next slide, please. Yes, you can see, if you look at the elite, yes, we have the elite, which is 3 or 4 groups. But again, these lines that I have, I don't know, army, bureaucracy, landlords, etc. You can think about it. This is analysis that needs to be done. I haven't done it. I'm just laying it out. And I think somebody needs to go deeper into it. What is the political economy of Pakistan? How does this fit in? How do these change shifts take place here? How do people progress? How do people make it forward? Societies that progress, that move forward, have a merit-based way of moving up. Djokovic is there, or Tiger Woods is there because he's competed. Steve Jobs is there because he's competed. If you don't have that kind of competitive norm, that's why the killer apps of Ferguson were important, you will not succeed. Do we have that killer app norm? Do we have the competitive norm, or do we have some other norm? And I think that's the problem. We have a rent-seeking norm, not a killer app norm. Go forward. Our success norm, as I said, is not, if you go to this slide, are we on the success norm slide, I hope? Our success norm is not merit. People don't make it through entrepreneurship. We went to the stock market, looked at the stock market, we tried to find entrepreneurs. There are hardly ever any entrepreneurs in the stock market. Let me tell you what I mean by an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur, again, is not my definition. I'll go to Shankata, I'll go to many other people. Basic definition that comes out is somebody who takes his own risks, somebody who does not appeal to the government, somebody who innovates and develops a product. That kind of an entrepreneur we don't find. We find people who got government subsidy, we find people who got bank loans that they defaulted on, we've got people who've got all kinds of other advantages from the government. That's not an entrepreneur. So, ladies and gentlemen, please make sure there's this other term, private sector versus entrepreneur. You must be clear. Private sector can be rent-seeking, private sector can be anything. Entrepreneur is what creates growth. Lots of literature coming out now. Growth is about entrepreneurship, not about private sector. Please, let's get our terms right. Right now, what do we have? We have got regulatory capture. Many of our industries have captured the regulator. We've got tariffs, which is a hugely protective regime. I told you about SROs. Please think about the SROs. We've got licensing. We've got government functionaries, the plot culture, the capture private space culture. Those things are extremely important, and we have to change those if we're going to grow. Otherwise, status quo benefits some, and that's great. Who am I to complain about it? Now, next slide. Now, the state, we have to think about it very carefully. It's not about dictatorship, democracy, or whatever, although democracy has been shown to be better for growth than dictatorship in the long run. There's no question about it. It's not as if dictatorship creates the long run growth. It's not even about, there are various institutional norms that have to work. And those norms are important. What are the norms? The norms are, for example, whether you have stable, just like we are trying to see right now, the three functions, the three sort of estates of government, judiciary, etc. But I think stability of bureaucracy is also very important. But we've seen also, for example, institutional autonomy of the central bank is very important. Institutional autonomy of various departments of government is very important. Institutional autonomy of the bureaucracy is very important. So there's lots of stuff that we can learn, which I want to do. But most important of all is, how do you have the state play the role of an empire which lets everything happen on the basis of merit and does not favor anybody? It's like a cricket game. You want the empire not to interfere with the players. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll just skip this. Let's go to the 2 slides more. Next slide, please, then the next slide. The slide called Geography of Economic Development. Okay? And from there, move to the next slide. Current state of our cities. Ladies and gentlemen, most important thing to learn is that growth happens in cities. And we have been trying for 60 years to prevent our cities from growing. What do I mean? No, our cities have grown. You'll all yell at me. No, our cities have grown. Look at Lahore. We've got Bahria town. We've got this, that, etc. No, I don't mean converting agricultural land into housing estates. I don't mean creating suburbia or a dead end land. Because lots of research shows growth doesn't happen in suburbia, especially when you've got this spread out with housing colonies and nothing else. The DHA model will not work. What works, ladies and gentlemen, in most cities, most of the world output is produced in cities. 70% of the world output is produced in 40 large cities. In every country in the world, it's the cities that produce output. We've got a strange narrative. We think that it's agriculture that produces output. Agriculture everywhere is a declining industry. It is city that produces. And again, I don't mean there's agriculture versus industry. Even the term industry is now changing. We've got to think about that. Even agriculture is changing. Agriculture is becoming industrialized. So there's a lot to think about here. But the most important thing is growth happens in city, what we are beginning to understand, what we learn from the world, if you look at the rankings of cities, for example, Pakistani cities don't even show up anywhere because Pakistani cities lack the characteristics of a city. What are they? One, we must have density, and that density must be in a downtown area or a city center or a central business district, whatever you call it, which you do lack. Two, we must high-rise. You can't have density without high-rise. Three, we must have mixed use. You can't have the Defence Housing Authority model. This is commercial, this is this, this is that. Drive everywhere. Four, we must have walkability. It is these items that create productivity. It is these items that create density. That create entrepreneurship. It is these items that create markets. What do we have? Cities, then again, another way to look at cities. Cities have culture. Cities have hyperactivity. Cities don't sleep, etc. All that is missing in Lahore. So how can Lahore be a city? Where is the culture? Where is the central business district? Where are the shopping malls? Where are the leisure? Where is, all those things are missing. Why? Not because we don't want them. Because all of us go to Dubai to get them. We see houses being converted to schools, houses being converted to shops. It's all regulation. It's all, sorry, I shouldn't say regulation. It's dumb regulation. Pure dumb regulation. Pure housing estate regulation. Where the elite wants to give itself houses, estates, without worrying about other things, which is kind of crazy. But yet, it places a huge cost on the economy, and that's what I hope that you will recognize. For example, sports industry is dead in this country. You can see India is making so much money from IPL, employing so many people, but we have, killed the sports industry. We have killed the shopping industry. We have killed the hotel industry. All that is pure dumb regulation, but it has a huge economic cost. So I showed you, if we just do a simple change in Islamabad, we could have 50% of GDP as investment. Let's move forward. In Lahore, take Barkat Market, for example. We've done a simple analysis. Just look at this. You've got, just for the use of the car, the red area, sorry, Barkat, when they go to the next slide, you see the red areas is the parking area. And you see the blue area, that is for shopping. See, the parking and the shopping area are exactly the same. Why do we need so much parking? Why can't we allow people to walk or take public transport if we have density now? Somebody will say, oh, but we don't have public transport. But how can we have public transport if you're subsidizing cars? So it's all a question of how you view things. If you allow density to happen, if you don't subsidize cars, you will have public transport. So all we are saying is that this will happen. Energy. I know everybody said energy, and Shahid can talk about it much better than I can. But look, for God's sake, the current lifestyle that we've got, where Lahore extends from Raiwind to maybe Kasur to Sialkot, it's totally energy efficient. We are maximizing the use of the car. And the single-family homes are totally energy efficient. There is lots of data around the world to show you that if you live in a flat, it's more energy efficient. If you use bicycles and cars, more energy efficient, but we don't want to use that. We want to spread out even wider. We want to use valuable irrigated agricultural land. That's a choice we make. And that choice means we need more energy. So we're always going to be energy deficient. So these choices are also very important that we have to think about. Now, move on next slide. Now, complexity I won't talk about. Just quickly, I'll go through the growth framework. Our growth framework is very simple, ladies and gentlemen. And it's deliberately simple because it doesn't have to be complicated. Those economists will come to you with 20,000 numbers and who try and present things in a very strange way. Think again. Our growth framework is simply 4 factors because we learn from the latest thinking that you don't have to do anything. Focus on the key institutions. One is quality governance. I've talked to you about that. Let's get our management right. The way we manage, for example, the convention center, the way we manage the planning commission or whatever, the way we use our human capital. What is the human capital right there in your home? What is the human capital here in the planning commission where I'm sitting? What is the entry of human capital in the planning commission? 7 years the chief economist position has been created. 7 years. I can't find a chief economist. My predecessors couldn't find a chief economist. Why? Because the entry barriers are huge. Why? Because we cannot attract a good person here given the rules that we have. The result is people have stopped studying economics because there are not enough economists being produced by the country. That's what institutions are, and we've got to think about it. So quality governance is all about the way we organize government and in the way we manage our public assets. And don't think about government, it's just beyond management. You've got to think about that. Second, vibrant markets. Now, vibrant markets, what are vibrant markets? They're competitive markets with entrepreneurship, etc., etc. Those are extremely important. We have to think about those. These markets are not the markets that we have in our private sector, entrepreneurs. People coming in with new products, dying as well. But all this, ladies and gentlemen, have to happen in a certain geography. That geography is the city. The current framework, the way we organize cities, we can't do it. It has to be in cities and creative cities. Density, high-rise, walkability, mixed use. Those are important things, and we've got to think about that. We have to think about changing the way we manage cities. Without that, we won't go anywhere. And the fourth most important thing is youth and community. How do we handle youth and community? Youth is the most important part of our society, and communities where the youth get raised. And that community is all about connectivity of people, and that community creates a certain productive synergy. Now let's go to the next slide. Ladies and gentlemen, this is all about getting the role of the government right. It's all about unleashing the chain of productivity, and that's something that we've got to think about. Next slide. If you think about it, I started with the role of the state, and we can sort of circle back to that and see it's the same group controls: cities, markets, public sector, governance, etc. The same group controls most of the things. So we've got to think about deregulating the market and deregulating the city. We have to think about professionalizing the government moving forward. Unless we can do that, it won't happen. That's why it's a software change we are talking about. And this will only happen if you have deregulation of cities. So here, I think basically, I'll just stop here. Quite frankly, in conclusion, all I will say is, we have to have a mindset change. It's not about politics, it's not about the leaders or whatever. As a society, we have to have a mindset change. We have to begin to think differently about our future. That future means a change of lifestyle, a change in the way we do business, a change in the way we arrange mobility in society, whether we can grow to be a merit-based society, whether we can become a merit-based society, whether we can allow entrepreneurship, whether we can allow change. That's what the growth framework is all about. It's all about economic reform. People ask me, okay, where's the money going to come from? There's no money required in making reform. There's no money required in making changes. It's all about making changes. We don't need to beg anybody. We don't need to go out there. We've got enough assets. As I told you, if we just do this reform in Islamabad, we'll have 50% of GDP of investment. We don't need to go outside to borrow money. We can do it without that too. But it certainly requires a change in mindset. Thank you very much. I hope you have a very good seminar. I'll join you in the evening. If there are any quick questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sir. We really enjoyed this, and I hope you have a short session when we assemble again in the evening. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.